series that's going to be beginning Easter Sunday. We're going to start a new series called I Am Jesus. And so my name is Pastor Eric. I'm here filling in for Pastor Chris. I'm the administrative pastor here at Calvary. And so when he's gone, that's when I get my chance to speak to you. So this morning, I am here. Right now, Pastor Chris is in Iron Mountain. He's speaking at a church. I don't know if some of you may remember Pastor Jesse when he came here to fill in for us. Now Pastor Chris is just returning the favor. Pastor Jesse was in Sheboygan. Now he's lead pastor at a church in Iron Mountain. So we're really glad that he's been able to take on a lead pastor position, and we're just Chris is helping him out this week. So really great that our church is able to do that, and really I just love the fact that I'm part of a church that is so willing to work with other churches and other denominations in that way. It's just really good to see. One quick announcement before I get started, I forgot to mention earlier, is that we have a Super Sunday. I believe it's in your bulletins coming up. There's a sign up for that in the back. So if those of you Super Sunday, spelled S-O-U-P, for those of you who, like me, can't spell. It's so we're going to be having some soup fellowship time following service that Sunday. It's going to be in honor of Pastor Chris's birthday. He's I won't tell you how old he is, so he probably won't want me to tell you. He'll tell you. He's still in his 30s, so he is older than me by a couple weeks. So. So his birthday will be celebrated with that Super Sunday. So we encourage everybody to sign up on the sign-up sheet to bring some soup and other things that we may need, and to join us for that celebration. But enough about that. We're here to talk about Jesus. I told Belinda that I would say it like that because she told me that I needed to. So Jesus. So, I was previously a youth pastor before I came here, and one of the hardest things about being a youth pastor was getting the students to answer something other than Jesus. It was just like they were taught from the time they were in Sunday school that the answer to everything is Jesus. Jesus is the answer to a lot of things. Jesus is the answer to a lot of problems, but he's not necessarily the answer to every question. And so, but it was like everything we'd ask them, they would answer Jesus. And it's one of the hardest things to get them to actually answer something honestly and truthfully. You'd ask them something, well, it would be like, if you could meet one person in history, who would you want to meet? It would be Jesus. Well, that's a good answer, but it's like, that's the boring Sunday school answer. How do you really feel? And then it's like, if you could, if there's one person that you want to be the most like, it's Jesus. It's, every Christian should want to be like Jesus, but okay, who else? You're trying to get them, you ask them, what's your favorite color? They'd say Jesus, and they'd be like, wait, what was the question? And so it was like everything. It's like Jesus, 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 and it's hard to break that from them. And just a couple weeks ago, we were, coming home from church. We were driving home. We were asking our kids. We ask them each week about their classes, and we were asking Dane. He's our little 3-year-old. For those of you who don't know, a 3-year-old boy is just like a ball of flesh and energy, and so the questions had to be pretty simple. There's a bit of a language barrier there yet, and so we were just like, did you have a story in your class today? He's like, yes, and it's like, what was the story about? He's like, Jesus, and we're like, no, it's like that's what we've been trying, and so we asked him a few more questions. Finally, we got out of him. He knew the whole story of Jesus feeding the 5,000, but it was just like, so it was just Jesus. It was like everything we were trying to avoid, from doing youth ministry. But in reality, as adults, we're kind of that same way. Don't you think? It's not just the kids that are like that. We kind of do the same things with a lot of different things that we do, where we don't really think about what's behind the things that we say or do or believe. We just kind of accept them for that's the way that they always are. And that's kind of what I want to talk about a little bit today in regards to worship. And so that's what we're going to discuss is worship. And I'm going to ask for a little bit of audience participation right now, so I hope you guys are ready for this. A little bit of audience participation. I got a few questions to ask. These aren't hand-raising questions. If you have an answer, I want you to shout it out. Jesus. All right, you guys are awesome. You guys are ready for it. Great. We got some Jesus answers already. But what is the first word that comes to mind when you think about worship? Jesus. I heard Jesus. I heard praise, singing. Okay, any others? Okay, joy, coming into the presence of God. Okay, great. All right, guys, get ready for this one. Who do you worship? All right, Jesus. Any? My wife. Good answer. Good answer. How do you worship? With your whole heart. Okay. Anybody else? Obedience. Okay. Anybody else? Actions, spirit. Okay. Good. All right. Where do you worship? Everywhere. Oh, good answer. Good answer. All right. So you've just successfully, proven my point and answered the way that you've been trained to from the time that you were young. You guys are awesome. I really thank you for just proving my point right there. You did a great job. Now, some of the answers were good answers. I'm not going to knock those answers. They were good answers. But what we're going to attempt to do is make you think a little bit more carefully about what worship is. And my hope is that by the end of my sermon here today, that you'll think of worship differently than you thought of it before. And so that's what we're going to try to do today. I have a couple more questions for you here as we get started. This time, what I want you to do is I'm going to ask you to rate yourself as a worshiper. And then when I call out the different levels, these are the different levels, either a great worshiper, an average worshiper, or a horrible worshiper. And when we get to the one, I'm going to have you guys raise your hands. All right. So how many of you would say that you are a great worshiper? Go ahead and raise your hands. Great worshiper. Okay, we got a couple. 3, 4. Okay, am I in the right place here? Are we in a church? Isn't this a worship service? How many of you would say you're an average worshiper? Okay, quite a few hands. That's probably most of the people in here would say an average worshiper. How many of you would say that you are not a very good worshiper at all? Okay, we got a few hands there. So, that was my expectation. My expectation, put your hands down. My expectation is that most of you in the room would probably say that you were an average worshiper. I'm going to tell you right now that you're wrong. I'm going to make the claim right now that everyone in this room is a great worshiper. Everyone in this room is a great worshiper. Everyone in this room is excellent at worshiping. You just might not realize it yet. And I know some of you are thinking, I'm just not that expressive in worship. I see these other people worshiping, they got their hands up in the air, and that's just not me. You're thinking that I'm not a great worshiper, but you are. And actually right now, before I go on, I've got a video for you. If you can get that queued up, Blake. Just a fun little video that I wanted to share before we go on.
And I know that each church has its own worship style, which is cool. Some people are more expressive in worship, some people more subtle, and it's all good. I go to a church that's pretty expressive in worship. It's a hand-raising church. That's what it is, right? That's what, Anybody here go to a hand-raising church? Am I here? Sweet. Who here does not go to a hand-raising church? Some of you are trying, you're like, I can't. I want to, Tim. I need to get some momentum. Totally cool. But hey, if you're not used to going to a hand-raising church, you want to go and join us, feel free to join us, but don't feel like you got to join right in, okay? Start slow. We got a lot of different hand raises that we use. We actually have names for our hand raises. So I'm going to walk you through real quick, okay, what they are, just to let you know. Say you're at my church, music is rocking. Start slow, hands in the pockets, little elbow flap, you're fine. Very subtle, get warmed up, get your heart rate up. When you're warmed up, start with the first one. Ready? Carry the TV. Carry the TV, that's our first one. Very subtle. Go to big screen, a little wider. Next one's my fish was this big. My fish was this big. If you're a liar, you go out there, that's fine, don't worry about it. Jesus loves you, grace. Next one's hold my baby, hold my baby. Got dueling light bulbs, that's our next one, dueling light bulbs. got goalpost. Everybody knows goalpost. Throwing a heartburn. A lot of people like to do heartburn. Double heartburn, right back to goalpost. What's my favorite? Mufasa. Mufasa, that's my favorite. The circle of life. Tim, can you go higher? Yes, you can. You can take one hand, go a bunch of different stuff. Pointer, hatchet, schoolroom. Release the doves, give the Lord a high five, press it out. A lot of women like to wash the window. Wash the window. And when you're comfortable there, go for the big three. Village people, Rocky, touchdown. There you go, there's your big three. You're set. You're a pro.
All right, so that's Tim Hawkins. I love watching his stuff. He's a very funny guy, good, clean church comedy. But yeah, so obviously there's some different worship styles, and we have introverts and extroverts in this world. I mean, how many know that there are introverts and extroverts? I mean, and so there's going to be a little bit of a difference of thinking and worship styles between the two. He just kind of makes it funny. I saw quite a few of those different hand raising styles this morning. It was hard to not laugh during worship at times. I was like, watching the video during the week. So, but it's and now you guys are going to be thinking each time which one you're doing. I just ruined it for you. But if I asked all the extroverts in here to raise their hands, that they'd probably break out in a spontaneous party. It was just they're the ones they love to be kind of in the attention. They're like they're the life of the party. They're the ones that they're fearless in crowds. They're comfortable being outspoken and expressive in a lot of ways. Sometimes even loud and obnoxious. That's kind of an introvert's perspective of it, I guess. But when you think of an extrovert in worship, you think of somebody like King David. King David, at one point, he danced before the Lord in public in his underwear. Now, it's not one that I recommend here in church. There was a time and a place for that. That was thousands of years ago, thousands of miles away. It's not here and now. If you want to do that in your home, that's up to you. But let's leave it there. So he danced unashamedly before the Lord. At one point, it was like that. That's what King David was. He was an extrovert in worship. He was expressive in worship. But then there's introverts. I'm an introvert. Naturally, I'm an introvert. And you might think, well, how can you get up there and preach as an introvert? Well, I don't know. It's weird. But that's what I am. We're kind of more unemotional. We're timid, fearful in crowds. We're scared to have our true feelings revealed. I'm most comfortable when I'm alone. Now my wife doesn't quite get that. She doesn't understand that I'm more comfortable. She accepts it now after 15 years of marriage. She finally accepts it, but she still doesn't quite get it. But it's like I'm most comfortable when I'm alone. I could take a long car ride with somebody else and hardly say a word, and it doesn't make me feel awkward. It probably makes them feel awkward, but it's just who I am. I'm more comfortable inside myself. Daniel, he shows us more of that introverted style of worship, where he would go to his home by himself several times a day, and he would pray to the Lord and worship. And so so both styles, they're going to look very different when we're worshiping, extroverts and introverts. So just because you're not expressive in worship doesn't mean that you're not a good worshiper. You can worship God from within just as well. In worship, I don't lift my hands. That doesn't mean I'm not worshiping. It really makes it hard for me to worship because it's so uncomfortable for me. That's not something. I'm more of the elbow flap kind of guy. So that's good for me. The elbow flap, I'm good with that one. But another part is that we're caught up in this false belief of what worship really is, and so. We think of our Sunday school answers that we have, and that's what we give. So we're going to talk a little bit here for a minute about what worship is not. what worship is not. First off, we're going to say that worship is not singing. Worship is not singing. And all the time we equate worship with singing. We have worship services. What do you expect? You expect some kind of a music service with singing and everything. If I had called up Rachel and said, "Hey, Rachel, you know what? You guys can take the week off this week," and everybody came in for the worship service and we had nothing for music, it would be a little awkward. It'd be like, what's going on? But it doesn't mean we couldn't worship. It just means that it would be really awkward because everybody's expecting that music. But worship is not singing. Now, can you worship through song? Yes, you can worship through song. No doubt about that. You can worship through song, but you can sing and sing and sing and sing and not have worshiped at all. And so worship is not singing. Somebody can stand all alone in a room by themselves and have offered up the most heartfelt worship and never even uttered a single word. And same line of thought, worship is not a service. Worship is not a service, meaning that, we have this, what we call a worship service, where, just coming here isn't going to be worship. Just because you come to a worship service doesn't mean that you're a worshiper. Can you have worship during a service? Absolutely, you can. Should you worship during a worship service? Absolutely, you should worship during a worship service. Should you worship other than at a worship service? Absolutely, you should. Worship isn't confined to something we do once a week. And you hear us say this quite often. You hear Pastor Chris say it all the time. But we're not as concerned about how you're impacted here on Sunday as we're concerned about how Sunday impacts the other 6 days of your week. And that's what the worship service is about. It's about getting us all coming together. If everybody here was worshiping the way that they should all 6 days of the week, and they all came back here to culminate together in a big worship service every Sunday, the worship would just be amazing and awesome and full. It would be something huge. So our other 6 days of the week are so important to our worship. It's not just Sunday. The third thing that worship isn't about, this is a tough one. Worship is not about you. That's kind of probably the hardest one for us to take sometimes. Actually, the most common thing complained about in churches, doesn't matter what church, this church, any other church, the most common thing complained about is the worship music. That is the most common thing to be complained about. Whether you get complaints about it being too loud, you get complaints about it being too quiet, you get complaints about it being too fast, too slow, the music is too new or too old. It doesn't matter. There's two sides to every coin when it comes to music. You're not going to please everybody, but those are preferences. Those types of things when it comes to worship music, those things are preferences. So the same. And the same thing happens here. We get those same types of complaints, but as many complaints as we get, we also get compliments, and so that's one of the great things about it too. But it's, we do our best to balance what we can, but ultimately when it's time to worship, that time we do our best to make an atmosphere for you, but that ultimately comes down to you to make that time of worship what it is, and that's about God. And I know probably some of you are thinking right now, but I don't see how any of this really makes me a great worshiper. And I still don't feel like I'm a great worshiper. And if I stopped right here, I would understand what that is. It's like because those things don't make us great worshipers. You can see how maybe you might be a better worshiper than you thought, but this next part that we're going to get into is where you'll kind of see that we are great worshipers. And that is, we're going to talk about the object of our worship. The object of our worship. And I was thinking of this for a long time when I was preparing this. I was trying to think of what the object of worship, the idol that is, that we see a lot in our society today. And I was looking, you think of these common answers that you give. Well, is it TV? Is it the internet? Is it cell phones? Is it this, that? And I was looking at it, and I'm like, no, really, the one thing that I think that our society puts above anything else is self. And I was looking at this and I was just like, yeah, I think, when I look at what these things are, these aren't objects of worship, these cell phones and TVs and things. These are instruments of our worship in a lot of ways. And so I think our society, we worship ourselves in so many ways. And we've made each of us our own God in a lot of aspects. Not that we don't worship the true God, but we worship ourselves so much more. We come once a week and we worship the true God, and then on the rest of the 6 days of the week, we're worshiping ourselves. And this is something that God's been working with me on. It's not something that I'm preaching, to each of you and not thinking that, hey, this is something that God has been really working on me, because I do the same things. And it's really hard for me, to really work through this, because there's a lot of things in my life that I see that, hey, I'm spending too much time, or I'm spending too much of this doing these things. And so it's something that's been really difficult for me working through this. So what do we do about this? What can we do about this? And that's kind of what we're going to go into next. I'm going to tell you guys a story about Abraham. This comes from Genesis chapter 22, and we're going to get the verse up here on the screen here in a little bit. But as they're doing that, I'm going to kind of lead into this story a little bit of who Abraham was and what he had come from. Leading up to Genesis chapter 22, Abraham in this chapter was confronted with a very similar problem, where he had to choose between something that was very important to him and following God. And a little background into Abraham is that God asked of him a lot during his lifetime. He had asked him to move from his homeland. He had given him this promise and this blessing. And several times throughout the story, Abraham, he knew the blessing was there, but he didn't act as though he really believed God was going to follow through with it. One particular story was God had promised Abraham a son, Isaac. And Abraham, with him and his wife, they were getting up there in years, and he was like, I just don't see God fulfilling this story, this blessing that he's promised us. And so they decided to go about their own way. They took one of their handmaidens and gave and Abraham slept with her. They had a son with him, and God said, no, that is not the promise that I had for you. I promised you a son with Sarah. And when he was 100 years old, Sarah was 90 years old. And those aren't like weird Bible years that don't match up. The Bible is very clear that she was well beyond childbearing years. She was literally 90 years old, and God had given them a son, Isaac, through Sarah at 90 years old. Just a miraculous thing. God had followed through on the promise that he'd given them. And so this is a few years later. Isaac was a boy at this point. So Abraham is well over 100 years old at this point, and God has seen him through so many different things and followed through on so many of his promises that when God asks him this, it's just an amazing story. Chapter 22, verse 1 says, sometime later God tested Abraham, and he said to him, Abraham. Here I am, Abraham replied. Then God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. God said, what? God said, sacrifice your son on an altar. First off, if God ever tells you to sacrifice anybody, I'm going to tell you that you're probably nuts. I'm just going to say, no, I don't think God told you that. You're probably nuts. Abraham had been through so much with God. Abraham knew God's voice, what God was calling him to do. And there's whole other stories of why we don't do animal sacrifices, and obviously child sacrifices either. That would be like, no, God did not tell you that. So if God ever tells you that, come see me and I will tell you don't do it. But Abraham didn't even hesitate. The next verse says, early the next morning, verse 3 says, early the next morning he got up and made preparations for their journey. He started preparing. It says, early the next morning, Abraham got up, loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. So on the third day, so he had 3 days to think about this, of what he was doing. He had 3 days and he was still going through with it. And he said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, then we will come back to you." And notice what he said there, "We will come back to you." You know, he knew what God was asking him to do, and he was willing, he was still going through with it, but he still believed that Isaac was coming back with him, even at this point. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the two of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, "Father?" "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The fire and wood are here," Isaac said, "but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Smart kid, huh? He had 3 days to think about it too. He's like, "Hey, we've got everything else here, but where's the sacrifice? I thought we were coming here to sacrifice." And so Abraham answered him, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the two of them went on together. You see, Abraham had learned through the years of not trusting God's promises and still God coming through, that he could trust God. And they were going, animal sacrifice in those days, that was worship. That is what worship was to them. That's kind of a foreign concept to us because we don't think, well, animal sacrifice, but that was worship to them. A lot of these animals, they were almost like pets, probably to a lot of these people. And so for them to be able to give something like that up to give to God was a huge deal and a huge commitment that they were making, that they were sacrificing this animal. It wasn't just like pets, but it was also their livelihood. That's how they ate. That's how they produced an income for their family, and how they survived. How they made clothing. It was these animals were very important to their livelihoods, as well as a lot of them were. If you've ever raised a sheep before, we had a 4-H thing, and my brother would raise sheep, and the thing was like a pet. It was like a dog. It would follow my brother around. It would play with our dog. They'd chase each other up and down the yard, and it was weird, But they're like pets, And so it was a very big deal. These sacrifices were. And they're very distant to us, and we don't really understand them. But Abraham goes on, and the story goes on where he's actually got the knife up, ready to sacrifice his son, and God stops him and says, "Abraham, you need to stop." And Abraham stops, and God says, "Hey, because you were willing to sacrifice your son, you weren't even going to withhold your son from me. It's because of that through you all nations of the world will be blessed. Through Isaac all nations of the world will be blessed." And if you look at the story, it correlates perfectly with how God sacrificed his own son for us, and that was that promise that was given through that. But you see, worship is a sacrifice. Sacrifice is central to what worship is. It's not just singing. It's not just raising your hands. We can have fun with all that. But worship is really a sacrifice. And in Romans chapter 12, verse 1, is where it really lays out what our sacrifices are today. And in Romans, and actually, we're gonna read Romans 12:1. But as you go through the whole book or the whole chapter of Romans 12, there it lays out what the different sacrifices that there are that we can do. But it says, offer your bodies as living sacrifices, and there it says living sacrifices. So we're offering our bodies not as a sacrifice to die, but as a sacrifice to live. So we're offering ourselves, our lives, in service and sacrifice as an offering to God, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. So offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. This in Romans chapter 12. This was written to Christians in Rome. A lot of these Christians in Rome, they understood animal sacrifice as well. They did animal sacrifices to their pagan gods, just as Jews had done animal sacrifices to our God. But the rest of chapter 12, Romans chapter 12, it talks about humble service, acts of humble service, of being part of the body of Christ and working in unity with one another. It talks about not thinking of yourself more highly than others. It talks about loving people and acting out in that love, acting out love, doing what is right in the eyes of everyone, and blessing those who are mean to you, who do evil things to you, and blessing those people. It's those types of sacrifices. Those aren't easy to do. We get into thinking about, our time is so filled up with so much of this stuff that we do that we don't have time a lot of times to go and help other people. And it's such a difficult thing to see that we spend so much time on our phones, on Facebook, watching TV and movies and entertaining ourselves and spending our money on things like eating out and all this other stuff. And I do these things too. And it's like, and then you think, well, but then somebody needs something, and we're like, oh, I don't have any time. I wish I could. I just don't have any time. But it's like we have that time. That time is always there. But it's got to be a sacrifice. And if you look at what Abraham did, he was willing to sacrifice his only son, and through that, God gave him his son and blessed him through that sacrifice. And he does the same for us. If we're willing to sacrifice the things that are important to us, he gives those things to us. We still have those things, and we still can do them. And he can bless us through that sacrifice. And so there's the three T's of what we have for resources. There's our time, our treasure, and our talents. And these are the ways that we worship God. We worship God through our time, our treasures, and our talents. And time is what we have. Everybody's given the same amount of time every day. We're all blessed. That's the equalizing resource that we have every day. Each day is a new day, and everybody has 24 hours with 60 minutes and an hour and 60 seconds and a minute. Every single one of us have that exact same resource. Our treasure, that's our money. It's the things that we own, our homes, our cars. Those things are our treasures. Those are our physical resources that we have. And then our talents, the things that God has blessed us with being able to do well. And these are the things that we can use in order to worship God. And we don't do these things if we use them only for ourselves, then God isn't worshipped in that. But if we go out, we're doing these things because we love God and we're serving His people, we're serving other people, then that is our true act of worship. So like with our treasure, and it's like that's our money and things. Where is your money going? That's something to kind of take a look at. Is it going to pay for conveniences like eating out, or a nicer car, a bigger house, upgraded cable packages or cell phone packages? And this, when I make that list, it hurts me too, because it's like I look at the things that I spend my money on, I'm like, man, it's like, yeah, it's like those are the things that it's like, it's hard to not make those choices because we're so used to kind of worshiping ourselves a lot of times. And these are the things that God's working on me right now. Or are we using what God has gifted us to help and to serve others? Because that is what He's telling us we need to do in Romans chapter 12 here. That's what our true worship is. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to call the worship team on up if you guys want to come on up here. I'm going to start closing this out, but I'm going to give you guys some homework for this week. And I know you guys love homework, especially those of you that are in school. You guys love homework. But what I want you to do this week, and we also have the take-home in your bulletins that's on the back. It's a list of scriptures. There's one for each day of the week. They're on worship this week. But also, on top of that, what I want you to do is I want you to take kind of a closer look at where you're spending your time and your money each week. What and who do you spend it on the most? And you don't have to do anything different this week. Just do what you normally do, but just take a closer look at where you're spending your money, and how does that what does that reflect about your worship? That's the question I want you guys to ask yourself this week. It's the question that I ask myself when I look at it. This is where we're spending our money, and this is where I'm spending my time, and it's like, what does that reflect about your worship? And I'm not here to tell you because you watch X number of hours of TV each week that you're from the devil and you're going to hell. I'm not here to tell you that because that's between you and God, of how much you feel is okay to watch and not. It doesn't need to be a rule, because when we start making rules, then it becomes a religion, and the religion of it takes away our choice of what the free choice of what God's given us, and we're all different people. That number is going to be different for each of us. So I'm not here to tell you that if you watch X number of hours of TV that you're a bad person, because that's just dumb, and I don't want to be dumb. So only you can answer that. So as we close out here, if you're wondering why you have a hard time worshiping when you come to church, you think about that. Think about how you're worshiping outside of church. And if you're worshiping outside of church, when you come in here, it doesn't matter what the music is, worshiping Him is going to be so much easier, so much more fulfilling. And so it's what's going on in your other 6 days of the week that's really going to matter. I'm going to close this out here by just praying over each of us, and then we're going to go into a time of worship after that here. Dear Lord, we thank you so much for the blessings and the sacrifice of your Son. God, we thank you that you've given us the ability to experience all the great things that this world has to offer. We thank you that you've blessed our culture and our country in such a way that we have an abundance. And Lord, I pray right now that Lord, that we can take a look at that abundance that you've blessed us with, and that we can see how we can use that to worship you. That we can live out our lives in a way that is pleasing to you, that is like the pleasing aroma of the sacrifices of the Old Testament. That when we sacrifice the things that you've blessed us with, that you can feel honored and blessed through that. Lord, that's our prayer, is that through our lives that you can be lifted higher, that through our lives that we can be a reflection of your majesty here on earth to those around us. That people can see you shining through us by the way we live and by the choices that we make on a daily basis, Lord. Lord, I pray these things over each person here. I pray that you can bless each of them, that as they make these sacrifices for you, Lord, that they can be continually blessed with more time, with more talents, and with more treasure, so that they have more to give. And Lord, we thank you for these promises and these blessings that you've given to us. And it's in your Son's name that we pray. Amen.